Hello, everyone. Welcome to Healing is Power. I pray that you guys are doing well out there on this beautiful Saturday night. You guys can find Healing is Power on the following platforms: YouTube, like, share on my YouTube channel, Spotify, Amazon Music, Pandora Radio, and iHeartRadio. Tonight, I have an amazing guest, Ms Kaleema. Amin. She's going to be talking about her book, Hidden in Plain Sight. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce you guys to this beautiful soul. Hello, how are
Hi,
you?
good. How are you?
Good. Welcome to Healing is Power. It's such a pleasure to have you on tonight.
Thank you so much for the invite.
No problem. So want to get right into it. Just talk about your book, who you are, your story, and just tell everybody, what it is that you're, out to do, what you feel what God has led you to do.
Yes, thank you. Again,
Hmm.
my book is Hidden in Plain Sight. My name is Kaleema Overton Amin. This is my first book. I have been writing professionally as a federal policy analyst for almost 30 years now. So writing was not new to me, but I had never written a book before. And I wrote this book as a result of a very traumatic experience. And I say that my trauma birthed this book because after going through what I and my family went through, I thought that, it would I just had to help others so they wouldn't have to experience, what I experienced. And so my book, Hidden in Plain Sight, Are You Being Groomed for Love Bombing, Spirit Breaking, and Abandonment, talks about the 9 red flags that you're being groomed for abuse. And that is multiple types of abuse: mental, physical, spiritual, and financial abuse, and
Hmm.
8 steps to recovery.
Okay. So, if you wouldn't mind, would you go through those steps? Just kind of share that with everyone.
Well, I don't want to go through all the steps because you need to read the book. I mean, I want people to,
Okay.
but I will talk
Okay.
about some of the things that we want to, the steps that I'm talking about, those grooming steps. And oftentimes abusers groom their victims. They
Mhm.
actually stalk their victims, quote unquote, before they even know that they're doing that. So they will kind of hover, and kind of hover around their friends, their coworkers, their neighbors. They can hover in many places before they actually target the victim to groom them. And they groom
Mhm.
them, by just being very amenable, being very helpful, being very complimentary, kind of, love bombing, the wine and
Mhm.
dine type thing that people talk about. And so that love bombing process looks like, a person who's, they'll say they want what you want, they hate what you hate, they love what you love, you know,
Uh-huh.
and just to reel you in, because you'll think, wow, if we have all these things in common, then we must be soulmates. They'll be very
Mhm.
complimentary, and very and they'll cater to you, but it's just really part of the love bombing phase. In my book, I actually interview multiple women, excuse me, multiple women about their experience with love bombing and grooming. And it's really the love bombing, spirit breaking, and then the abandonment and abuse phase. And so
Mhm.
I talk about, how to avoid, that type of grooming, how to recognize when you're being groomed. Oftentimes, like I said, you're not the only one that's being groomed. If a person's being groomed, your family, your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, the neighbor,
Mhm.
your dog, your children, everyone is being groomed around you. And so when you report the abuse or the bad behavior, no one is believing you, because they'll say, oh, we saw
Right.
this catering to you. We saw this person just kind of kissing your feet. Well, that's the public and the public. So the grooming process is grooming you and those who see you. But when you get to stage 2, that spirit breaking and demeaning, all of that will happen privately. And it's all, by design. And so, I was a policy analyst for 23 years in the federal government. And so I decided to analyze the policy, the procedure for grooming. And that's how, I kind of um, came up with the 9 red flags between that and interviewing women who were African American, South American, Caucasian, Muslim, Christian, Catholic, about their experiences with grooming and spirit breaking, demeaning,
Mhm.
abandonment, and abuse.
Wow, wow, that's amazing. That's so amazing. I definitely want to read your book as well. Where can everybody find your book?
Yes, the book is available at online at Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Google Play, iTunes, and Kindle.
Okay.
Excuse me, I have allergies from the.
It's okay. Tis the season. I've been suffering myself, so I definitely get it. So I wanted to ask you, kind of like who are you, Kaleema, as a person? Like, what is your story? Kind of a little bit from childhood. You know, who are you as a person?
Yes.
And I
Well,
asked all my guests this.
okay. Well, I grew up in North Carolina in a small town, Elizabeth City.
Okay.
Not too much out of the ordinary. I grew up, with all of my family within, a 6 block radius, so we were able to move around freely as children, you know, to the homes of our family. It was a small town, like the teachers lived on our streets or lived in our neighborhoods. And so I grew up reading a lot. I started writing when I was around 12, writing short stories and poetry. um,
Hmm.
I read everything I could get my hands on, but back then we're talking about like in the 70s. Um, there wasn't a huge focus at that time on having books for children of color.
Hmm.
And we were and our parents weren't able to provide those things for us. So I read a lot of different types of novels and magazines and newspapers. Um, and then when I finally had an opportunity to go to college, I majored in English literature. And I thought
Hmm.
that I was going to be an English teacher, but it didn't turn out that way. I ended up, after a while, going to graduate school and majoring in urban planning. But I ended up, going, excuse me, into the federal government. And that's where I became a policy analyst and a contract specialist. And so I just spent 23 years writing, in federal policy and compliance. And so that's why with the book, I took, the avenue of just analyzing the policy and procedure of grooming because it was a place that was familiar to me.
Hmm.
Um, the incident that occurred that led to me writing the book really was probably the worst thing, one of the worst things I could imagine would happen. But, we never know what the creator has in store for us. And so sometimes when we
Right,
think,
right.
well, this is horrible, but it's really pushing us, into a new space, right? Um, at the time I was married, and long story short, and it's in the book, my husband at the time took my son and I on a vacation that was also our wedding anniversary, and he abandoned us there. We went
Wow.
away, came back with one less person, and we never spoke to him. He never contacted us. We never saw him again in that way, other than when I actually, took him to court. So once I started talking to other women about this, what I experienced, and I was very vocal about it. I didn't try to hide it. That's what they want you to do. Any type of abuser, whether it's mental, physical, spiritual, or financial, they count on you hiding the abuse out of shame. And I did not do
Absolutely.
that. I completely, immediately was very vocal about it. And so because I was being vocal, other women were coming to me and telling me about their experiences. And so that's how I ended up writing the book and interviewing women from different backgrounds, because oftentimes people think that they're safe from abuse because of their religion, because of their
Hmm.
economic status, because of their educational level. They think I'm safe. I live in a safe
Right.
neighborhood. I have safe family. I have safe friends.
Hmm.
People are educated. They're well to do. They have money. But, most of the people who commit this type of abuse, are some of the very people that are leaders in our communities, leaders in our churches, in our mosques, in our synagogues, leaders in the community, in the schools, doctors, lawyers, just
Yeah.
every life. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And those type of people that are in those type of careers, you would never think that they would do something like that. That's where it gets tricky. Right. And like you said, a lot of times people, if you try to bring it forth, they won't believe you because, oh, well, such and such wouldn't do that because they're a doctor, or such and such wouldn't do that because they're a lawyer, you know? So, yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
So I did
that's,
in interviewing these women, I created case studies. I am case study number 5. I didn't
mhm,
interview myself or write my own case study, of course. I had to get I got another writer to do that, so it could be a very objective, view of my story, and an objective case study written about me. Um,
mhm,
the book has 5, women, 5 case studies, and they experienced their psychological abuse at different stages. One woman, hers was during the engagement period. He uh she brought her mother from another country to meet him because they were engaged. And then the day that they were supposed to go to dinner with the mother, he just disappears. He ghosts her on phone, on social media. He just ghosted her completely and just disappears. And so
wow,
we're talking about people just really ghosting their families. Like, people ghost people on social media, they're ghosting people in real life. And so, that's that situation. And another story, or case study in my book. One woman, he was what they call, she was wined and dined, and she had a fabulous, romance, and then they had a huge wedding that he insisted on. And um, the day after the wedding, they get on, excuse me, on the plane to go to the honeymoon, and he
mhm.
immediately starts degrading her on the plane. He became a totally different person as soon as she got on the plane.
That's how they do it.
Yeah.
That's how they do it.
And on the honeymoon, he abandoned her multiple times because she wouldn't comply with whatever, he was requesting. So it's different stages and situations. One of the late, excuse me, I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine. Take your time. I get it. It's okay.
One of the ladies, her husband groomed her into, he really sexually exploited her for his own purposes, and also to demean her and to degrade her. And he groomed her over a course of 9 years into this situation, kind of like the Shades of Grey type situation.
Mhm,
And I recall asking her during the interview, like, how did you come to this lifestyle? And she said, it's not my lifestyle. I just wanted to have a good Catholic marriage like my parents. And then she ended up in this very, very dark place where she was being groomed, for sexual
mhm,
exploitation by her husband. And they were married for 15 years or so. And he groomed her over the course of 9 years before they got to that point.
mhm. Wow. Wow. That's so unfortunate. I, from personal experience, I have experienced narcissism and manipulation. So, in this interview, and again, I thank you so much for coming on my platform. I definitely can relate. And, just listening to you speak on, kind of, what happened with you and, the women that you've interviewed, kind of, it just reminds me of so much that I have myself, overcome and gotten away from. And I'm still on my healing journey. And
Mhm.
I, made this platform because I want different people of the world to share their story, to enlighten others that it's okay to heal. It's a journey. It's a step process. It's not going to happen overnight. I myself I'm still in the healing process because of everything I've gone through from childhood into adulthood. And I just love hearing everyone's story and how they come up out of it. That's therapeutic for me to hear
Yes.
people's story.
Yes, and I mean, my book actually was very therapeutic. I was in therapy from the next day after the abandonment. I was in therapy because I strongly believe in therapy and counseling. And
Yes.
so the book came about really as an organic step in my healing. I don't like to journal. As I said, I write a lot, but I started doing
Mhm.
research about narcissism and how it's related to abandonment and the different forms of abuse. And I was doing the research just to really um just to kind of heal myself because I do research all day, for work, or I'm researching different things. And I felt like the more I knew about it, the more I could understand it, not approve of it, but just understand, what was happening, to me and what's happening in my life and to my family. We were all very
Mhm.
devastated and, severely harmed, by this. Not only me and my son, but, my siblings, my parent, my father, my mom had already passed away. During this time, I was caring for my dad. He was terminally ill and he was living in our home, and so we go away on a vacation to come back with one less person, and so, it was very devastating, even for my father, as he, you know, a few weeks after that, I had to put him in hospice because I wasn't able to continue to care for him in the home. And so he was in hospice for 10 days before he passed. And he thought that it was his fault. He thought that this occurred because I took him into the home, and so it was just really
Mhm.
devastating for us, for me and my siblings, for my father to feel that way, literally, on his deathbed. But it had nothing to do with him, and it had nothing to do with me. It's all about the
Mhm.
person, the people who inflict this type of pain on people, you know,
Mhm.
everything to do with them and who they are. They will continue to do it. I found out he had participated in this type of behavior previously. He will probably most likely do it again. It wasn't a first time offense. And so
Mhm.
so we have to really kind of be able to separate ourselves and say, you know, if I'm the victim of the abuse, then I can't blame myself. I can't allow other people to blame me. I can't
Right.
take on that guilt, you know. And oftentimes people would ask me, like, you must have been having problems in the marriage. Well, up until this week, that week of the abandonment, we never even had an argument the whole marriage. So when people would say to me, like, why didn't you tell me you were having problems? Why didn't you come to me for help? I'm like, I couldn't tell you I was having problems that I didn't know about. He had a great way of pretending that everything was great to get us on this vacation, and then he became another person. Just
Yeah.
like the lady who got on the plane. They get married one day, they're enjoying their wedding, and they get on the plane for the honeymoon, and he became another person. So the
Yeah.
mask, all the narcissists wear a mask, and the mask will slip one day, and you will see the monster that lives behind the mask. You know,
Yes. Yes. I tell people, and I know a lot of people really don't pay attention to this. I don't know if you noticed it, but I always tell people, look at the eyes. Look at the eyes. The eyes are the key to the soul.
Mhm.
But with me, when I went through what I went through, with me being so young, I couldn't really, like, I saw it, but I ignored it.
Right.
Yeah, and it's like you said, they wear this mask. It's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
That's the name of one of the chapters in my book. It's Dr. Jekyll.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, yeah, yeah. They do a whole like 360 on you.
Yes.
You're like, whoa, wait a minute. Like you're just totally thrown off. Like, where did this come from? Like,
Right. And not just the eyes, but I the expressions, because oftentimes they are expressionless. And so when things, because they don't have empathy and they don't have social skills and social graces, right? No matter the education level, you will
Mm-hmm.
notice they often are expressionless because they really have to copy and mimic other people's expressions so they know the proper way to behave, right? And just like
Yeah.
you're talking with these people, they mimic you, whatever they mirror you, right? But they don't have their own freedom of emotion. They're emotionless. And so you will see in their faces, they're often expressionless, you
Yeah.
know, and
Like
they will,
cold.
yes, or they'll mimic what you're doing. If you smile, they smile. Well, I learned in my research for my book that this is actually a learning style for babies, right? And it's typical for babies. Like if you smile at them, they smile. If you frown, they frown because they're learning how to attach the facial expressions to the feeling. But this is
Yes.
something that you learn as an infant. Or even pets do that. If you have a pet, a cat or a dog, if you make facial expressions, they'll react to it and they'll mimic you. If you're sad, they'll be sad. If you're happy, they'll be happy. And so, but this is something that is lower level, emotional intelligence, right? So a baby can do it, and a pet can
Yes.
do it. But these people never grow beyond that in their emotional intelligence. So they have no empathy, they have no feeling for others, and they just mimic you.
Mm-hmm.
It just because, and oftentimes they have themselves been abused, but that is no excuse for abusing others because we have to seek help. We have to seek out
Absolutely.
help and counseling
Yes.
therapy so we can improve ourselves, like constant process and product improvement, of ourselves.
Yes, yes. Healing is power. I can't express it enough. You have to heal. You have to, if you've gone through childhood trauma, even adult trauma, you have to heal from that because realistically, it's nobody's fault what you've gone through. And you can't put that off on anybody else. You have to do your own self-healing, you know.
Exactly. And in
Yeah.
my book, I do talk about how oftentimes we end up in a revolving cycle of abusive relationships because we haven't completely healed. When you think about, if you got hit by a car and broke your leg, they put on a cast, then you go to the orthopedic surgeon, they, reset your leg and put the cast on and send you back out into the street. Well, they've repaired your leg, but they haven't dealt with the trauma of being hit by the car. They haven't dealt with the trauma of that big bill you're going to get, the financial, trauma. And they haven't dealt with why you were in the middle of the street in the first place. Why do you keep walking into the street? So if the healing, if the abuse or the damage is mental, physical, spiritual, and financial, then the healing has to cover all of those areas. The healing has
Yes.
to be mental, physical, spiritual, and financial. And so if we don't get complete holistic healing, we'll continue to make these wrong choices in the people in our lives, right?
Yes.
We all want to make better choices, but sometimes we don't even have the capacity because we haven't healed.
Yep. 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 Healing the soul is so important. It really is. And again, my platform, I stress it so hard because like I said, I'm still in the healing phase. I've come a long way, but there's still always room for improvement. So
Yes. And I
absolutely.
myself as well. I started writing the book while I was going through the divorce. It was
And
almost
that is so
immediate.
powerful.
Um,
That is so much. I know that takes so much strength to write something while you're still healing from what
yeah,
you've gone through.
and yes.
I love
And
that.
actually, I would often be visiting my dad at hospice, and he was, sleeping a lot at this time, and I was writing, so not only was I going through the divorce, I was dealing with the loss of my father, and everything was happening in real time. But I felt that if I didn't do it then, that other people would not have the benefit of this information.
Mhm.
And so I just, kind of pushed through and wrote the book. I also felt like if I didn't speak out, if I didn't fight back, that I would never be
Mhm.
the same again. That I would never be the Kaleema that was before, the psychological and emotional and financial abuse. I would never be able to get back to being that person if I didn't fight. And I fought, publicly, I fought in my community, I fought in court, I
Mhm.
I fought really hard, not only for myself, because I knew that I would be whole again. But when I talked to so many other excuse me, or so many other women who lost their homes, lost their jobs, lost their cars, lost their health insurance, were homeless because of abandonment, then I felt
Mhm.
like, I could be a voice for those women.
Wow. Wow. I love that. I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Um, when you were coming up, who did you have someone you really looked up to? Like, um, did you have like was it a family member, mom, dad? Did you have someone that you really looked up to?
Yes, I had lots of family members. I have a pretty close family, but like all families, if families have problems, so we were not
Absolutely.
immune to the problems. But I feel like my upbringing, like I said, I grew up in a small town.
Hmm.
I had, my parents and aunts. My parents were divorced, but I lived with my mom and my stepdad. But my dad was in our life. I had grandparents, I had great aunts, great uncles, cousins. I had a lot
Hmm.
of people that were around me. Even my great aunts all were college graduates, were teachers. We were not well off by any means, but my family valued education. Every,
Hmm.
you know, did the most that they could do when it comes to education. Excuse me.
Hmm.
I'm so sorry.
That's fine.
So I looked up definitely to the women in my family, to the men as well, um, because it was a sense of unity,
Mm-hmm.
a sense of purpose. Like everyone is going to do something. If you're going to work, if you're going to go to school, if you're going to go in the military, if you're going to be a teacher, whatever you want to do, be the best, that you can. Um, and so I think, and then my grandmother, I definitely got a lot of strength from her. We spent a lot of time on her front porch drinking Pepsis and eating sweet cornbread. So a lot of time with our grandmother and our great aunt Eula and people like that, and hearing the stories about how they struggled to become teachers, how they struggled, to my grandfather built their home like with his own hands, you know.
Wow.
We grew up hearing about how our great great uncle had escaped from slavery. We grew up hearing these stories. As a matter of fact, it was a part of the conversation.
Yeah, yeah. My grandfather on my mother's side, he it was so amazing hearing this story from my mom, but my grandfather, I think it was like maybe like 20 years or so. He had just barely made it out of slavery. He was just born out of slavery. And I was just like, wow, so that means my great grandparents were slaves. And it's just like, I'm telling you, those elders, the anarchies, there's something amazing. There's
Oh
something
yes, oh
amazing.
yes. Because even I think about, on my father's side, my grandparents, my grandmother did not go beyond the third grade, and my grandfather only went to the sixth grade, but they sent their kids to college.
Wow.
And on my mother's side, my grandmother, she returned to school and she graduated from college with her youngest daughter, and she went on
Mhm.
to teach until she retired.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. 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 Um, Another thing that I normally ask my guests are if you could tell your younger self something, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. Um,
Hello.
I said that's a loaded question. I would I would tell myself, to be courageous, because
Mhm.
even as independent and outspoken as I am, there were often times that I look and I see that I was not courageous, right? Because I
Mhm.
didn't have the tools, to be courageous. Oftentimes girls are raised to be quiet. We weren't raised to be quiet, but raised to not keep up such a fuss, right? To
Mhm.
not insult people, to be kind. And these are very, you know, I mean, very good qualities. But we're not raised to say, okay, wait a minute, this person, doesn't mean me well. But oftentimes we treat people well who don't mean us well because we're taught, to be polite.
Yes.
And so I think I would tell my younger self, don't worry about being polite. Call a thing, as Iyanla would say. Don't always try to be polite because it really caused me growing up, a lot of it put me in a lot of positions that I probably should not have been in because I was being polite. And we're
Mhm.
oftentimes will, not just say no, right? And
Mhm.
not no, but and no, and just no. Like I don't need to give you a but and an and, right?
Yes. Yes.
And that's
I
what I was
can relate to that.
like. Just say no. Period. There's no but. There's no and. There's no explanation. I'm just saying no because I have the ability and the power to just say no, and I don't have to explain myself to you.
That part. That
Yeah.
part. That
I
part.
think my younger self spent a lot of time explaining, a lot of time trying to not hurt feelings, or a lot of time trying to be
Yes.
right, when it didn't call for it, right? When I was in a space that didn't require me to be polite.
Right. Right. I can definitely relate to that because even as an adult, it took me to pretty much now at 37 to be okay with saying no. And like you said, no explanation is needed. And like in my younger self, I would be afraid to speak up. That was my issue. I was afraid to speak up. I would always turn the other cheek because I was always afraid of how, if I expressed how I felt, or, you know, went off on whatever person that was attacking me, how they would feel. So because of, I worried how much about how they felt, I wouldn't defend myself. I would just kind of let it slide, turn the other cheek. But as I've gotten older, I'm like, I can't do that. I can't. I hate to say it like this, but I can't spare feelings. I can't
Right.
spare your feelings. Yeah.
And can you imagine how many women were abused, abandoned, and killed even because they were concerned about how the person who's harming them is going to feel mentally or physically, right?
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
that's,
Yeah.
oftentimes when it comes to self-defense, women have, even if they have a weapon, they're reluctant to use
Mhm.
the weapon against a person who's actually harming them, you
Yep.
know. So this is something that, that we need to really try to find a better ground for, because when it comes to the narcissist, during my research, I found out that the narcissism is on a spectrum, and the high end of that spectrum is a serial killer. The low end of that spectrum is an overindulged, self-centered type person, right? When you think
Mhm.
about narcissism, and the serial killer is at the other end of that, right?
Mhm.
And that grooming, because the serial killer does groom victims as well, right?
Mhm.
When we think about that, and as women, our the idea that we don't want to harm someone, even the person that's harming us, the what happens when the schoolyard bully becomes your husband, your neighbor, your coworker, your friend, your sibling,
Mhm.
right? We have to, have our defense mechanisms up and running and working, and be willing to use them. And I think,
Absolutely.
you
Absolutely.
said at your age, in your late 30s. I'm 54. So,
What?
yes, ma'am. I'm 54, but I feel like, wow, had I had this
You look amazing.
oh, thank you.
God bless you. You look amazing. I thought you were my age.
Thank you. But I said
You're
that to
welcome.
say that, for young women, don't beat yourself up, because I'm just learning this, right? And I let my confidence in someone saying, "Oh, we have the same religious beliefs, we have the same goals and aspirations." I let that keep me from asking the hard questions. I asked the questions, but I didn't follow up, and I didn't ask for proof. And so those are the three things we need to do when you're dating, or you're in courtship, or any type of situation.
Mhm.
We need to ask the questions, the hard questions, and we can talk about those if we have time, if you want. We need to follow up, and we need to ask for proof from the individual, proof from family, proof from friends,
Mhm.
wherever you need to ask for this proof. You need, if you have to run a background check, I'm like, you know what, you
Yes.
need to ask, hey, are you okay with me running the background check? And if he blinks, keep it moving. I need a
Yeah.
marriage contract, not just get married and go up the aisle and all it. No, there's a marriage contract or a prenuptial agreement. I don't care if you don't have two red cents to rub together. You need a prenup.
Yep.
Even if it says nothing other than we're purchasing this house together. If he should leave for whatever reason, or abandon the family, or I get to live in this house for X amount of months, years, or whatever, or my children and I will be allowed to stay in this home, because so many women, end up homeless from
Yep.
abandonment.
Yeah.
In my book, women are getting kicked out of their homes. He just showed
Yep.
up home one day. You got to get out of here. It's my house. So we need to think about those hard questions and ask them. Don't be polite. Don't worry about hurting someone's feelings. If his feelings are hurt because you're trying to protect yourself, that's not the man for you anyway.
Absolutely.
And don't
Absolutely.
worry about follow up, because I asked the right questions, but I didn't follow up. I didn't ask the follow-up questions. And when I was around family and friends, I didn't ask them, oh, if the person tells you, oh, I want to start my own business, when you get around their family, their friends, oh, what do you feel about him starting his own business? And they're looking around like, what is she talking about? Something ain't right.
Yep.
He wants to go on the Hajj, on a holy pilgrimage, or he wants to, one lady, her fiance was like, oh yeah, you want to open a yoga studio? I've been wanting to do that. He not. There was no proof of that. What is the
Right.
proof that you want to buy a house, go on Hajj, open a business, start a school? Um, what did you do towards this goal? Now goals can change. So you started this, but then you decided to do something else. You want to pay off your debt. Okay. What was the proof that you were doing these things? That you even wanted to have a family. Where's the
Right. Right.
proof of that? Because in one case, I found out during my research, the man told the woman that he convinced her to marry him to have a family, but he never told her he had a vasectomy.
Oh.
There was
Oh.
never going to be a family, but he was
Yikes.
gone before anything else could happen. Right? He just disappears. Right? They're married and he's gone.
Mhm.
So, and then when she sees him again, he's married to someone else. Like that. Some states you can get a divorce in 30 days, uncontested, without children.
What? Well,
And that,
see, I wouldn't know anything about that. I've never been married, so wow.
yeah. So
Wow.
you have to really, in my book, I talk about all the ways to recover your life after it has been hit by a tornado of narcissistic destruction, but how to protect yourself on the front end. I
Mhm.
feel like I'm not going through all of this for nothing. If nothing else, I'm going to let you know how to protect yourself so you don't end up where I was. And,
Mhm.
you have to protect yourself mentally, physically, spiritually, financially, and legally. And I talk in my book about that. I have
Mhm.
documents in my book. I have Islamic marriage contracts in my book. I have prenuptial agreements in my book for
Wow.
not
Okay.
Muslim. I have letters, of complaint. You can write a letter of complaint in your religious community.
Oh,
I have
wow.
all these things in the book. How to protect yourself on the front end. And if you missed the red flags and you weren't able to protect yourself, how can you recover your life on the back end? Because you can do that. I was in a very, very, very dark place. When I tell you, it was just unbelievable between the abandonment and 2 weeks later, my father passes away and he was, living in our home. And it seemed like everything was going wrong. Then I started having problems at work because I was so stressed. I couldn't work.
Yeah.
Dealing with
Yeah.
these things, I was not capable and able to work, effectively. So now I'm having problems at work. It snowballs, right? You start having problems at work, at home, and it just kind of balloons and balloons. And so,
Mhm.
I really had to kind of chop away at these things to recover my life. you know
Yes.
and so I wanted to make sure that I help other people do the same thing. And my book is not just for women, it's also for men, because brothers, you need to protect your daughters, your sisters, your mothers, your nieces, your aunties, your play cousin up the street. You need to protect the women in your life from the predators out there, and these people are indeed predators. So the book is also for men as well. If they want
Mhm.
to know how to protect the women in their lives, their daughters and nieces and so on. And the information can be used for men as well. But I focused on women because of the situation. Um,
Mhm.
and one man had asked me, was I going to write a second book about men? I don't think I will do that. But I would definitely, love to see something similar for men. And I hope that a
Yeah.
man picks up that mantle and does that.
I think you should. I really think you should. Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
after I'm healed, because
Definitely.
all of this just happened. It hasn't been 2 years. I
Oh
was writing.
wow. It's been recent. Okay, it's recent. Okay, yeah. So you
Yes,
need a little bit more time.
yes, most definitely. Because even like I said, I had another writer to interview me and to
Mhm.
write my case study. And honestly, I could not read my own case study. Every time I started to read it, I would have severe anxiety. And so, but I was
Mhm.
trying to write the book. And so what I did was I put my case study aside, literally, and I just wrote the book. I wrote the entire book. I put in the case studies and interviews from the women that I interviewed. And then when I was finished, I went back. And by that time, then we're looking at 9 months, I was able to actually read my case study and then infuse it into the book and go back and put it in where, it was necessary. But it was such a traumatic experience that I could not even read. When I was reading it, it seemed like it happened to someone else. Like this could not have happened to me. Like, how am I still here? Because many people, they become very ill from stress. They become
Yeah.
suicidal. They become clinically
Yes.
depressed. And I had extreme anxiety where all of a sudden I couldn't even go into, I remember taking my son to the Nike store. to get school shoes, and I had a panic. I didn't even know it was a panic attack because there was so many people that I felt unsafe everywhere I went because of what had happened. My therapist explained to explained to me that, because I didn't see this danger, now I see danger everywhere, even when there's none there. And so it's
Mhm.
definitely a long healing process. I won't say I'm completely healed. I will say that I am 80% there, but some
Yeah.
of the lingering effects like anxiety and stress, and just even unraveling all of the financials and the legal stuff and being able to recover in that way is still ongoing.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I suffer from anxiety as well. Social anxiety. A little joke I always share with my guests is that I love, interviewing, but like even doing this interview and other interviews, like it gets my anxiety up. It's so weird, but I love what I do. And a lot of people ask me, well, how do you interview people, but then you have social anxiety and you don't really deal with a whole lot of people? I guess it's what God has called me to do, and I have to do it, no matter how, freaked out I may be or shy or whatever like that. I have to do it. I have to do what God has called me to do. And I enjoy it. And I love hearing, everyone's story.
Yes, I can
Yeah.
definitely identify with that. Even while writing the book, a lot of the women were still traumatized, and so we would often have
Hmm.
stop the interviews. Because I did
Yeah.
answer questions, survey questions on paper, and then some of them recorded their responses, and then we had Zoom interviews. And oftentimes I could see the trauma in their face, or they would say, I just can't talk
Yeah.
anymore. I can't do it anymore. And so, we would just have to wait, and so I felt the same way while writing the book. I would read, what happened to them, and I would just, sink into, a bit of a depression, even just reading, all of these stories. And so I did condense it down to just, the five, well, 4 or 5, including myself, but I could have had hundreds of interviews. People, women were inboxing me, even men were inboxing me on Facebook and messaging me and texting me and emailing me, men and women, about the trauma that they have suffered at the hands of narcissists.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Narcissism it's, can't even really describe it. It really mentally messes with you if you have experienced it. And I've experienced it multiple times, probably about 3 times in my life. And,
And usually people are victimized more than once if they don't get the education that they need to recognize the grooming process. And
Mhm.
hopefully my book will help people recognize that. And they're victimized more than once because they may have grown up with some of these behaviors. All bad behavior is not narcissism, but they might have grown up in situations where there were some narcissistic tendencies in the family. And so they recognize this and they think it's familiar, and so that therefore they think it's safe. Oh yeah, this is how it was at my home. So this is a safe space. And so oftentimes,
Mhm.
until we start to educate ourselves about narcissism, once we do, we will pick out people in our family that have these behaviors. They may not be a full blown diagnosable narcissist with narcissistic personality disorder, but they may have some narcissistic tendencies that you become accustomed to. And so when it comes to you, you think it's familiar and safe, but really, it's familiar because it was dysfunction, dysfunction in the family, right? And then you
Mhm.
seek out and find that same dysfunction, or you open yourself up to it, in a spouse, right? Or a mate,
Mhm.
or in a relationship.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the other things that I like to ask my guests are basically, that one special person in your life. I like you to give a shout out to them, just that one special person.
I would like to give a shout out to my son. He, is in high school. He's thriving. It was a very, you know, the experience we were together when this occurred. I don't really talk about him in the book that much. That's his story to tell. I talk briefly about how this affected him, but I do talk about how it affects children. So I would
Mhm.
want to give a shout out to my son. He's doing great. And he's a real trooper. So
Yeah,
the person, yes, I would want to give a shout out to.
that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Right now, is there anything that comes in your spirit that you want to share with all the listeners right now? Just anything that comes to your spirit.
Um, I want to share with the listeners that you really want to invest in yourself, invest in your education, and invest in your self worth. Do things that build your self worth. This is your armor. This is going to be your protection in life because sometimes, like I said, we're raised to be polite. We don't want to offend people. We want to, be helpful. But you really have to educate yourself about grooming, about narcissism, and about the different forms of abuse: mental, physical, spiritual, and financial. Oftentimes people say, oh, you weren't physically abused, and so it's not abuse. But abuse doesn't start out that way. No one walks up to you and says, I'm going to physically abuse you, or physically abuse you, and you say, oh, yeah, I want to marry you. That doesn't happen like that. The abuse is like little pebbles and stones thrown over time. They test the
Mhm.
water to see how much they can throw at you, how much you'll accept. So abuse starts out feeling good. That's what grooming is. Grooming feels good. If it didn't feel good, it wouldn't be able to groom you. It feels like love. It feels like safety. It feels like support. So you can let the guard down. And then here comes the demeaning, the spirit breaking, right?
Mhm.
Comes planting self-doubt. So invest in educating yourself about grooming, about manipulation, about demeaning, spirit breaking. Educate yourself. So when you see these behaviors in people, you can go the other way. Listen to your gut. My gut told me a lot that I ignored.
Uh
Listen to,
huh.
and so listening to your gut is a learned behavior. Sometimes it doesn't come natural to all of us. So invest in your own education about manipulation and abuse and grooming so you don't get to that point where you're in a physically abusive relationship or mentally and psychologically abusive relationship.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Well, Kaleema, thank you so much for being on Healing is Power. I appreciate you so much. Can you let the listeners know where they can find your book, where you are on social media, any social media platforms? Please let my listeners know.
Okay. Right now, I'm on Facebook under Kaleema Overton Amin. The publisher is creating my other platforms, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and I will have a YouTube channel. So they're still working on that. I'm just out here a little early, you know, um, talking to people. And the book is available at Barnes and Noble, online, Amazon, Google Play, iTunes, and as well as Kindle. And the book again
Awesome.
is Hidden in Plain Sight: Are You Being Groomed for Love Bombing, Spirit Breaking, and Abandonment?
Thank you so much. And I'm definitely going to read your book. It seems very inspiring. I love it. I love it.
Thank you.
Thank you so, so much for being on Healing is Power. And again, to all my listeners, anyone passing through, you guys can find Healing is Power on the following platforms: YouTube, Spotify Radio, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and Amazon Music. Kaleema, thank you so much for being on Healing is Power. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. And take care. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you so much. Take
All right.
care.
Take care.
Bye.